The unexpected meeting in the conference room was the starting point for everything. I was looking forward to discussing the new project, but I hadn't expected to meet John there. He was my boyfriend's work colleague and someone I had never noticed before. When I entered the room, our gazes met, and for a moment, I felt a shiver run down my spine. That exchange of glances was unlike any other I'd ever had. Their eyes were intense, almost as if they could see right through me. "Hi, Maria. Nice to finally meet you formally," he said, smiling in a way that made my heart race. "Hi, John." "My pleasure," I replied, trying to keep my composure. As we discussed the project, the tension was palpable. Every word he said seemed to carry a weight, an intensity that I couldn't ignore. I tried to concentrate on what he was saying, but it was difficult. My heart was beating fast, and one question kept running through my mind. "Why do I feel like this?" "Are you all right?" he asked, noticing my distraction. "Yes, I'm just a bit tired," I lied, trying to disguise the whirlwind of emotions I was feeling. The meeting ended, but John's penetrating gaze stayed with me. As I left the room, I felt that something had changed. My boyfriend, always so attentive, seemed distant compared to John's overwhelming presence. Why did he affect me so much? What was it about that look that took my breath away? "See you later, Maria. See you around," said John, with a tone that seemed to carry a veiled promise. "See you later, John," I replied, feeling my face heat up. As I walked back to my desk, I couldn't help thinking about him. That unexpected encounter had awakened something in me, something I couldn't understand. Why did I feel this way? Was I losing control of my feelings? With every step, John's image became clearer in my mind. Doubt and curiosity began to mix in a dangerous cocktail of emotions. I knew I needed to keep my distance, but a part of me was already longing for the next meeting. John's penetrating gaze was still fresh in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about him, even as I tried to focus on my work. My thoughts were a complete mess, and the question on my mind was, why do I feel like this? Then, at the end of a long day at work, as I was packing up to leave, John approached me. "Hey, do you want some coffee?" The question was simple, but the way he looked at me made my heart race. I hesitated for a moment, but eventually said yes. "Sure, why not?" We went to a coffee shop near the office, a discreet and cozy place. We sat at a table in the corner, away from prying eyes. As soon as we sat down, the conversation flowed naturally. We talked about our projects, our dreams, and even our fears. John seemed to understand me in a way that no one else could. It was almost scary, but at the same time, incredibly comforting. "I always felt there was something special about you," he said, with a sincerity that left me speechless. I blushed, looking away, but I couldn't help smiling. "You intrigue me too," I admitted, finally finding the courage to look him in the eye. The exchange of glances that followed was intense. It was as if the whole room had disappeared, leaving just the two of us there, connected in a way I had never experienced before. This is wrong, I thought, but I couldn't look away. John reached out and gently touched my hand. The touch was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the electricity that ran through my body was undeniable. I pulled my hand back, surprised by the intensity of the sensation. "Sorry," he said, but he had a smile on his face that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing. "It's okay," I lied, trying to hide the confusion I felt. "I think I'd better go. It's getting late," I said, standing up quickly. John stood up too, looking a little annoyed. "Sure, I'll see you tomorrow," he said, but there was a nonverbal promise in his eyes that gave me goosebumps. As I walked home, thoughts of the evening swirled around in my mind. Every word, every look, every touch. I knew I was entering dangerous territory, but the excitement was impossible to ignore. When I finally got home, my boyfriend was already there, waiting for me. "Hi, love," he said with a smile, pulling me into a hug. I reciprocated, but my mind was still elsewhere. "How was your day?" he asked, not noticing my distraction. "It was good," I replied, trying to sound convincing. "And yours?" He started talking about his day, but I could hardly pay attention. My thoughts were stuck on John and the connection we had shared in that little cafe. I knew that this was just the beginning of something that could change everything. But at that moment, I couldn't care. John's subtle touch still burned on my skin, and the excitement of being so close to him was addictive. I knew I was about to cross a dangerous line, but the temptation was too great to resist. And so I mentally prepared myself for what was to come, knowing that my life would never be the same again. In the company parking lot, the sun was beginning to set, dyeing the sky orange and pink. I was leaving later than usual, my head full of deadlines and work responsibilities. It was then that I saw John leaning against his car, seemingly waiting for me. My heart raced. I couldn't believe I was about to meet him outside of work. "Hi, are you still here?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but feeling my hands sweat. "I was waiting for you," he replied, with that smile that always disarmed me. "I need to show you something in the car. It's quick." My mind knew I should refuse, but my body seemed to act on its own. I walked over to him, and he opened the car door. Inside, he had a pile of documents scattered around, as if he was looking for something. "Ah, yes, here it is," he said, picking up some paper. "I was just checking something, but I really wanted to talk to you." I paused for a moment, feeling the tension in the air. "About what?" He looked into my eyes, and before I could react, slowly moved closer until I could feel his breathing. "About this," he whispered, and then his lips were on mine. It was a deep kiss, full of desire that had been contained for so long. Every second seemed like an eternity, and at the same time, it passed in the blink of an eye. My senses were on high alert, the touch of his lips, the pressure of his hands on my waist, the heat emanating from our bodies. Everything felt so right and so wrong at the same time. When we pulled away, we were both out of breath. "That shouldn't have happened," I said, but my voice sounded more like a moan than a reprimand. "I know," he replied, still holding me by the arm. "But you felt it, didn't you? You can't ignore it." I pulled away a little, trying to regain my composure. "John, I'm with Rodrigo. That's wrong." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know you're with him, but we can't pretend it didn't happen. And you know it's going to happen again." At that moment, a wave of guilt hit me. Rodrigo was a good boyfriend, always attentive and affectionate. And there I was, in the company parking lot, kissing another man. "I have to go," I said, feeling the tears start to form. "I can't do this to him." John didn't try to hold me back this time. "I understand, but know that I'm here, and I won't give up on you so easily." I got into my car and drove home, trying my best to hold back the tears. When I arrived, Rodrigo was already there, preparing dinner. He greeted me with a smile and a kiss on the forehead. "Hi, love. How was work today?" he asked innocently, unaware of the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "It was tiring," I lied, trying to hide my guilt. "But I'm happy to be home." As we ate dinner, the image of John and the kiss in the parking lot kept popping into my head. The guilt was overwhelming, but at the same time, the memory of that kiss made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt for a long time. That night, lying next to Rodrigo, I stared at the ceiling, trying to find a solution to the dilemma I found myself in. I loved Rodrigo, but I couldn't deny the intense attraction I felt for John. How could I go on living like this? But for the moment, all I could think about was that I needed a good night's sleep to clear my head. I closed my eyes, hoping that sleep would bring some answers, but knowing deep down that this was a situation that wouldn't be resolved so easily. The first messages between John and me began innocently enough. He sent me a text asking about a detail of the project we were working on together. I replied quickly, and he immediately made a funny comment about a work colleague. I laughed to myself, staring at the screen of my cell phone. From then on, the messages became more frequent. I was at work, trying to concentrate on a report, when my cell phone vibrated. It was a message from John. "I can't stop thinking about our kiss," he wrote. My heart raced, and I felt a shiver run through my body. I replied with a simple, "Me too." From that moment on, our conversations became bolder. He told me about how he wanted to see me again, about the things he wanted to do with me. Each message was a spark that lit a fire inside me. I read and reread his words, imagining every scenario. The excitement was palpable. Each new notification on my cell phone made my heart race. Sometimes I had to stop myself from smiling openly as I read his messages at work. It was as if we were playing a secret game, where only the two of us knew the rules. One afternoon, during a meeting, my cell phone vibrated again. It was a message from John. "You look beautiful today." I looked across the conference room at him, and our gazes met. My face heated up, and I had to look away to avoid arousing suspicion. However, it wasn't just the words that excited me. Fantasies began to invade my thoughts during work. I found myself distracted, imagining furtive encounters with John, our bodies entwined, our muffled sighs. Every touch, every look, every word exchanged at work turned into something else in my thoughts. I tried to concentrate on what I was doing, but it was difficult. My mind always went back to John, to the messages we exchanged, to the growing desire I felt for him. Once, during a lunch with colleagues at work, my cell phone vibrated again. It was John, sending me a provocative message. "Can you meet me later?" I read the message and felt a chill in my stomach. I looked around to make sure no one was paying attention to me and quickly replied, "Yes." The rest of lunch was torture. All I could think about was the meeting we were going to have later. Back at work, I tried to concentrate on my tasks, but it was impossible. Every time I thought of John, a smile formed on my face. I had to control myself so as not to appear distracted, but it was difficult. My coworkers began to notice my change in behavior. "You've changed lately," commented one colleague. "You seem happier." I just smiled and shrugged, trying to appear indifferent. John's messages kept coming, each one bolder than the last. "I want to see you now," he wrote one night. "I can't stop thinking about you." My heart was pounding so hard that I thought everyone around me could hear it. I quickly replied, "Me too. When and where?" At that moment, I realized that I was completely involved in this dangerous game. The messages, the secret meetings, the furtive touches. Everything was a mixture of pleasure and guilt that consumed me. I knew I was cheating on my boyfriend, and the guilt weighed heavily on me. But at the same time, I couldn't stop. Every message from John was a reminder of the desire and passion we felt for each other. I was torn between guilt and excitement, between love for my boyfriend and the irresistible attraction to John. And despite everything, I knew I would continue to play this dangerous game. I decided to book a room in the city. It was an impulsive, almost desperate decision. I wasn't sure what I was doing, but I needed to see John away from the prying eyes of the office. Adrenaline pulsed through my veins as I walked through the hotel lobby. Every step I took was a mixture of fear and excitement. My heart was pounding. and I felt each beat like a rhythmic drum that reminded me of the danger I was in. When I got to the room, John was already there, waiting for me. He smiled when he saw me, a smile that made my heart race even faster. "You came," he said, his voice low and full of emotion. I just nodded, unable to find the words. As soon as the door closed, the passion that had been pent up inside us exploded. John pulled me into his arms and kissed me with an intensity I had never experienced before. His lips on mine were like fire, burning away every bit of my resistance. I gave myself up completely, forgetting everything and everyone, just enjoying the moment. Our bodies moved in perfect harmony, as if we were meant to be together. I felt a sense of freedom that I had never experienced before. Being with John was like escaping the bonds of my everyday life, and at that moment, nothing else mattered. "I needed this," I whispered, my lips brushing against his. "Me too," he replied, his eyes shining with desire. We spent hours together, exploring every inch of each other's bodies, as if we wanted to memorize every detail. Every touch, every kiss, every sigh was a confirmation of what we felt. There was no room for doubt or regret. Just the present, just the two of us. When we finally stopped, exhausted and satisfied, I lay down next to John, my body still trembling with the intensity of what we had experienced. He pulled me closer, his arms wrapping around me securely. "I don't want this to end," he said, his voice soft but full of determination. "Neither do I replied, knowing that I was giving myself over to something I couldn't control. While we were together, I felt a freedom I had never known before. It was as if all the worries, all the fears, and all the doubts disappeared. John made me feel alive, and at that moment, nothing else mattered. "You're amazing," he said, his fingers tracing soft lines on my arm. "You too," I replied, smiling. But deep down, I knew that this freedom was temporary. I knew that as soon as I left that hotel room, reality would hit me like a punch in the stomach. But for now, I decided to enjoy every second. "Let's make it last," he whispered, his lips brushing mine. "Yes," I agreed, knowing that I was throwing myself into an abyss that I might not be able to escape. After a while, we got dressed in silence, a complicity that we didn't need to express in words. Every movement was charged with an intimacy that only we understood. "Are you all right?" John asked, his hand holding mine. "I am," I replied, squeezing his hand firmly. "And you?" "I've never been better," he said, smiling. As we walked back to work, the silence between us was comfortable, but full of meaning. We knew that what we had was dangerous, but we also knew that we couldn't stop. "It doesn't end here," he said, his voice firm. "I know," I replied, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement wash over me. Every step I took towards the office was a reminder of the risk we were taking. But at the same time, it was also a reminder of how worthwhile it was. "Let's be careful," he said, looking deeply into my eyes. "Always," I replied, knowing that I was committing myself to something I couldn't control. When we finally arrived, we parted ways, each going our own way. But deep down, we knew we were more connected than ever. And as I returned to my work, a smile formed on my lips. I knew I was entering dangerous territory, but I also knew I couldn't turn back. And that was enough for now. I woke up to sunlight streaming in through the hotel room curtains. I looked over and saw John still asleep. His presence next to me caused an avalanche of emotions inside me. I felt a mixture of pleasure, guilt, and confusion. How did I get here? I asked myself this question over and over again as I watched his serene face. John opened his eyes slowly and gave me a complicit smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice hoarse from sleep. "Good morning," I replied, trying to hide my confusion. He got out of bed and started to get dressed. The silence between us was full of meaning and memories of the night before. I got up too and started looking for my clothes scattered on the floor. As we got dressed, we exchanged glances that said more than words could. There was a mutual understanding and a silent acceptance of what we had done. But at the same time, I felt an enormous weight on my chest. My boyfriend. How could I face him after that? We left the room together, without saying much. The walk to the hotel parking lot was silent. Every step I took felt like an internal struggle to control my emotions. John held my hand for a brief moment, as if to give me strength. But he soon let go, perhaps realizing that this would only complicate things further. When we reached the car, he turned to me. "We'll get through this, you know," he said, trying to offer some form of consolation. "I don't know, John. It's very complicated," I replied, my voice breaking. He nodded and got into the car. I did the same, and we sat in silence during the drive back to work. My head was full of thoughts, each one more confusing than the last. How could I hide this from my boyfriend? He didn't deserve it, but I was trapped in a cycle of desire and guilt that seemed impossible to escape. When we arrived at the office, John turned to me once again. "Let's act normal, shall we? Nobody needs to know." "Of course," I agreed, although a lump in my throat prevented me from saying any more. We entered the building and went our separate ways. I tried my best to look normal, but guilt consumed me. Every time my phone vibrated, my heart raced, fearing that it was a message from John, or, worse, that my boyfriend had found out something. During the day, the feeling of remorse only increased. I saw my boyfriend on the screen of my cell phone, in the photos we had together, and an immense pain took hold of me. How could I have done this to him? He had always been so good to me. At lunchtime, I found a secluded spot in the cafeteria to try to process my feelings. John passed me and gave a brief wave, and I returned it with a forced smile. Guilt was a weight that crushed me, but at the same time, there was a part of me that longed for more time with him. The duality of my emotions was driving me to the brink of madness. At the end of the day, I went home trying to prepare myself to face my boyfriend. I walked through the door, and there he was, with a smile on his face. "Hi, love. How was your day?" he asked. "It was good. How was yours?" I tried to sound as natural as possible. "Quiet. I thought we'd do something special tonight. What do you think?" he suggested, with a twinkle in his eye. My heart squeezed. "Sure, that sounds like a great idea," I replied, forcing a smile. While he prepared dinner, I retired to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. Who was that person I saw? A cheater, a liar, but also someone who was confused and lost. I took a deep breath and returned to the kitchen, trying to put on a mask of normality. During dinner, he talked about his day, and I tried to concentrate on every word, but my mind wandered, torn between guilt and desire. John and I had crossed a line from which there was no turning back, and now I had to deal with the consequences, even if it meant hiding the truth from someone I loved. When I went to sleep, I lay next to my boyfriend and felt a tightness in my heart. Guilt whispered in my ear, reminding me of what I had done. But at the same time, John's face invaded my thoughts, bringing a feeling of desire that I couldn't control. I closed my eyes, trying to find peace, but knowing that the internal battle had only just begun. John's tempting invitation for a getaway arrived on an ordinary evening, while we were exchanging bold messages. I was lying in bed next to my boyfriend, who was fast asleep. The screen of my cell phone lit up the dark room as I read the words John had sent. What if we spent the weekend together, away from everything and everyone? My heart raced. The idea was both exciting and terrifying. I thought about my life, the relationship of years with my boyfriend, the stability we had built together. But the memory of John's touch, his penetrating gaze, made my whole body shudder. I couldn't deny the desire that was growing inside me, a desire that only John could arouse. I answered with a simple yes. From that moment on, everything changed. I needed a convincing excuse from my boyfriend, something to justify my absence for an entire weekend. I decided to use work as an excuse. Love, a business trip has come up this weekend. It's important. I can't turn it down, I said the next morning, trying to sound as natural as possible. He frowned, clearly surprised. At the weekend? That's rare, isn't it? Yes, but it's a special project, an opportunity I can't miss. I'll make it up to you later, I promise, I replied, trying to hide my nervousness. He sighed and nodded, trusting me as always. The next few days were a mixture of anxiety and excitement. I planned every detail of the trip with John, from booking the hotel to the times we would meet. Every message exchanged increased my anticipation. I found myself smiling at my cell phone, lost in thought about what awaited us. On Friday, at the end of working hours, I made up one last lie to my boyfriend. I'm going straight to the train station. I'll text you when I get there, I said, giving him one last kiss before I left. I felt a knot in my stomach, a mixture of guilt and adrenaline. I bumped into John at the station and couldn't help smiling when I saw him. Ready for our getaway? He asked, with that smile that made my heart race. More than ready, I replied, feeling the electricity between us. As the train took us away, we talked about everything and nothing, laughing and exchanging complicit glances. It was as if the world around us didn't exist. We arrived at the hotel, and as we entered the room, the tension in the air was almost palpable. John closed the door behind us and pulled me into a deep, urgent kiss. I've waited so long for this, he murmured against my lips, his hands exploring my body. That weekend was a whirlwind of emotions. The passion we shared was intense. Everything seemed more alive, more real. But at the same time, guilt never left me. Every moment of pleasure was followed by a silent reminder of what I was doing, of the betrayal I was committing. On Sunday night, as we drove back, my heart was heavy. I knew I had to return to reality, to my boyfriend, to the life we had built together. But I couldn't deny my feelings for John, the connection we had. This can't go on, John, I said, my voice laced with emotion. I love my boyfriend. I can't keep lying to him. John held my hand, his eyes full of understanding. I know, but I can't let you go, not now. I knew he was right. Even knowing the risks, the pain it could cause, I wasn't ready to give up on John. The desire for him was too strong, the connection too real, and so we went back to our routine, pretending that nothing had changed. But inside me, I knew that everything was different. The lies I told my boyfriend had become a constant part of my life, and guilt an ever-present shadow. But at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about John, the bold messages, the furtive encounters that would continue to happen. I was trapped in a cycle of pleasure and guilt, unable to choose one path and leave the other behind. Arriving at the destination brought me a mixture of emotions. John and I had just parked the car at the seaside hotel. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky with shades of orange and pink. I was nervous and excited at the same time. He looked at me and smiled, a smile that promised more than words could say. "Shall we go in?" he said, taking my hand firmly. I felt a shiver run through my body. We entered the hotel, and the reception was luxurious, with dark wood furniture and soft carpets. We checked in quickly and went up to the room. When the door closed behind us, The tension in the air was almost palpable. John pulled me close, and our lips met with an urgency I had never felt before. Every kiss, every touch, seemed to set my skin on fire. We moved in sync, as if we had been rehearsing this moment for years. Every second was intense and charged with desire. It was as if time had stopped, and there were only the two of us in that room. "I've waited so long for this," he whispered in my ear, as his hands explored my body. I was breathless, lost in the intensity of the moment. I couldn't think of anything else but how alive and wanted he made me feel. The night was a mixture of passion and madness. Every intimate moment we shared was more intense than the last. I couldn't believe what was happening, but at the same time, I didn't want it to end. There was a flame between us that seemed impossible to extinguish. While we were together, the constant fear of being discovered prowled through my mind. Every sound in the hallway, every ring of the phone in the bedroom, made me jump with fright. But paradoxically, this adrenaline rush only made everything even more exciting. It was as if every risk increased the intensity of what we felt for each other. "Are you all right?" John asked, noticing my tension. "Yes, I'm fine. It's all so new and intense," I replied, trying to stay calm. He pulled me into a tight hug, and in that moment, all the worry seemed to disappear. We spent the weekend exploring the city, but always finding time to lose ourselves in each other. With every moment together, the connection between us grew stronger. I knew I was getting more and more involved, but I couldn't stop. It was like I was in a dream that I didn't want to wake up from. Last night, as we lay in bed, he looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "Clarissa, I know this is complicated, but I can't imagine my life without you now. John, I feel it too. But it's so hard. What if we're found out? We'll deal with it when it happens. For now, I want to enjoy every moment we have." His eyes shone with sincerity, and I knew he meant it. The thought of being discovered terrified me, but the thought of not being with him seemed even worse. The next morning, as we packed our things to go back, the weight of reality began to fall on me. Guilt and remorse began to creep in, but at the same time, I couldn't bring myself to fully regret it. What we had experienced was real, intense, and something I had never felt before. On the way back, the silence between us was comfortable, but full of unspoken thoughts. I knew that getting back into the routine would be a challenge, but at that moment, I just wanted to extend the time we had together as much as possible. "Are we going to do this again?" he asked, holding my hand as he drove. "Yes, I want to," I replied, without hesitation. And at that moment, I knew I was diving deeper and deeper into something that could change my life forever. The return to routine was more challenging than I had imagined. After the weekend of passion with John, going back to work and everyday life with my boyfriend felt like a real test of endurance. Every look from him, every gesture of affection, reminded me of what I had been hiding and made me feel overwhelming guilt. But at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about John. The memory of our times together was always there, like a shadow. "You look different," my boyfriend said one evening while we were having dinner. He looked at me with a worried expression that made me swallow. "How different?" I tried to hide the tension in my voice, but I knew I wasn't being convincing. "I don't know. You seem distracted. Is something bothering you?" he insisted, and I felt a knot forming in my stomach. "It's just work," I lied, trying to sound casual. "A lot of pressure with deadlines and everything." He seemed to accept my answer, but I could see that suspicions were planted. And with good reason. I really was different. My heart was torn between him and John, and hiding it was becoming increasingly difficult. At work, every interaction with John was a mixture of excitement and fear. Every time our gazes met, I felt a shiver run through my body, and it seemed he felt the same. "We need to talk," he whispered one day as he walked past my desk. "Today, after work." My heart raced. What did he want to discuss? Was he having the same dilemmas as me? The idea of being with him again, even for a brief moment, was irresistible. But at the same time, guilt was eating me up inside. After work, I met John in the parking lot. He was leaning against his car, with that penetrating look that always took my breath away. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, straight to the point. "This situation is driving me crazy." "I know," I replied, my voice almost a whisper. "But what can we do? This is so risky." He took a step forward, shortening the distance between us. "I don't care about the risks. I just want to be with you." His eyes were full of determination and desire, and I felt my defenses crumble. "I want to, too," I admitted, my voice trembling. "But how are we going to carry on without being found out?" John smiled, that smile that always made my heart leap. "We'll find a way. We always do." From that moment on, our secret relationship continued. Every text message, every furtive encounter, was a constant battle between pleasure and guilt. But I couldn't stop. The bond between us was too strong to ignore. One morning, while I was at work, I received a message from John. "Meeting at the hotel tonight? I need to see you." My heart raced. I knew it was risky, but the desire to be with him overcame any fear. I quickly replied, "I'll be there." In the evening, I made up an excuse for my boyfriend and went to the hotel. When I opened the door to the room, there was John, with that smile that made me lose control. As soon as the door closed, he pulled me close, and our lips met with unbridled passion. Then, lying on the bed, I looked at him and whispered, "This is crazy, John. We can't go on like this." He caressed my cheek and said, "I know, but I also know that we can't stop. Not now." And he was right. No matter how much guilt consumed me, the attraction between us was undeniable. I decided right then and there that I would keep going, despite all the risks. I needed John, and as wrong as it was, I couldn't imagine my life without those intense moments we shared. So cheating became part of my routine. Every day was a new challenge, a new lie to hide the truth. But in the midst of all this confusion, I found something I never knew I was looking for. An overwhelming passion that made me feel alive. And despite everything, I wasn't ready to give it up. Encounters with John became part of my routine, as if they were a basic need that I could no longer ignore. They were furtive, quick, full of passion and guilt. In the office, we exchanged glances full of meaning that only we understood. Every time our eyes met, my heart raced and my body reacted in ways I couldn't control. In one of these moments, John approached me in the pantry, where I was getting a cup of coffee. He looked around to make sure we were alone, and then whispered, "We need to talk. Today, at the usual hotel." I nodded, feeling the familiar mixture of excitement and remorse. In the afternoon, I made up an excuse to leave work early. When I arrived at the hotel, he was already there, waiting for me. The door closed behind us, and, in an instant, we were in each other's arms, as if the world outside didn't exist. "I can't stop thinking about you," John murmured as his lips explored my neck. "Neither can I," I replied, panting, feeling a wave of desire consume me. Every encounter was an explosion of feelings. The passion was overwhelming, but the guilt was always there, like a shadow that wouldn't leave me alone. When we were together, everything seemed to make sense, but at the same time, I knew I was walking down a dangerous path. After one of these intense encounters, while we were lying in bed, reality hit me hard. I remained silent, staring at the ceiling, while John stroked my arm. "What's wrong?" he asked, noticing my change of mood. "I'm feeling guilty, John. I don't know how much longer I can go on like this." He sighed and pulled me closer. "I feel the same way, but I can't stay away from you. You're stronger than us." I knew he was right. Something inside me wouldn't allow me to put an end to what we were experiencing. The connection between us was too intense to ignore. However, the guilt and fear of being found out were constant. Every time I lied to my boyfriend, I felt a heavier weight on my back. "Do you think we'll ever be able to stop?" I asked, my voice full of uncertainty. John looked me in the eye, a mixture of sadness and desire in his gaze. "I don't know, but as long as we're together, we'll enjoy every moment." I wanted to believe that that was enough, but the truth was that reality was knocking at the door every time I came home. My boyfriend, increasingly suspicious, asked questions that I could barely answer without stuttering. "You're different, more distant. Is something going on?" he asked one evening while we were having dinner. "No, it's just work. It's very stressful these days," I lied, trying to stay calm. But he wasn't convinced, and I knew that if I carried on like this, sooner or later he'd find out the truth. However, the idea of stopping with John was unthinkable. I was trapped in a cycle of pleasure and guilt that seemed to have no end. The furtive encounters continued, both in the office and at the hotel. More and more intense, more and more risky. The mixture of pleasure and guilt consumed me, leaving me unable to think clearly. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't stop. John and I were plunged into a whirlpool of emotions that enveloped us and pulled us deeper and deeper. "You're my addiction," he once whispered, as we lay entwined in bed. "And you are mine," I replied, feeling the truth of my words. I accepted that betrayal was part of my life now. It was a path of no return. Every encounter with John was proof of this, a confirmation that, as much as I wanted to, I couldn't stop. I was torn between two realities, two lives that couldn't coexist, but which, somehow, I was trying to maintain at the same time. With each passing day, the tension grew. Guilt was a constant companion, but the desire for John was stronger. I knew I was on dangerous ground, that at any moment everything could fall apart, but I couldn't find a way out. And so the betrayal continued, fueled by furtive encounters and stolen moments, an inescapable part of my life, a truth I wasn't yet ready to face.